Tell you how this came to be on our agenda. I was actually at a Boeing briefing, and they mentioned at the very end of that briefing that Common Core was one of the things that they were very interested in. And the more I thought about it, and the more I talked with them about it, they kind of explained more about what Common Core was. Now, Common Core was just a buzz phrase that I had heard, and you know, we had not really paid a whole lot of attention to it, admittedly, here at the state level. And we deal in the capital at the, in Jeff City here at the state level all the time. So I really hadn't focused much on what Common Core was and what the impact could be. But when I started hearing more about what it was and why Boeing was interested in it and why it was something they were very committed to, then it made a little more sense to me. And I thought it would be good if we had somebody who actually knows what Common Core is come and talk to you about what it really is and what it really isn't, so that you get beyond the politics and look at what really would happen with Common Core, or will be happening with Common Core. So we invited the Council of Chief State School Officers, and I can't say that 3 times fast, to come and present. Rick Melmer is with us today. He's going to give you a little presentation on Common Core.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Well, I'm grateful to be with you today, and as Ray said, I'm Rick Melmer. I'm from the Council of Chief State School Officers. We call it CCSSO. And the organization is really all the commissioners, secretaries of education, state superintendents. Chris Nicastro from Missouri is a member of our group. And so essentially it consists of the 50, what we call chief state school officers from around the country. I'm a former chief from South Dakota. I served when Kent King was the chief here in Missouri, and Kent and I were good friends. So since that time, I went on and was the dean of the School of Education at USD for a while in South Dakota. And now I'm doing full-time contract work, much of which is with CCSSO surrounding the Common Core. And as Ray mentioned, it's becoming a more common topic now in education. And I'm grateful that a manufacturing conference like this with business leaders would carve out a little bit of time to learn about what's happening at K-12, because it's really important. We think it's really important for folks to know what kind of product are you getting over time. Missouri has enjoyed, as you folks probably know, a strong education system for quite some time now. I'm coaching the Missouri team as they implement the Common Core. That's part of the support that CCSSO provides to states. So I have an opportunity to work with a lady by the name of Sharon Hellwig from the Department of Ed here in Missouri, and I enjoyed my opportunity to work with her and her team as they work on Common Core implementation. Missouri adopted the Common Core state standards in June of 2010. So several years ago, Missouri made that decision to adopt the Common Core. But you might think, what does that mean and what is it that they adopted? So let me tell you a little bit about it. The Common Core state standards really focus on what we call ELA, English Language Arts, and math. So they're only in those 2 areas. And they were developed by CCSSO and the National Governors Association. And they focused, as I said, on ELA and math. Really the purpose behind the Common Core and why it was adopted was really that there was a noticeable difference between high school exit and college or career entrance. First of all, we have a lot of students that are taking remedial courses at the higher ed level, and it really is because they haven't been prepared properly at K through 12. As employers, you might say we hire students out of high school or early university, and there are still gaps in their learning, and we notice it when we hire them on the job. So, so often in the past, in our country, we had 50 different sets of state standards. Every state had their own set of content standards in math and English language arts. So instead of having 50 different sets of standards, the hope was to have one set of standards across our country. While I was chief school officer in South Dakota, I had a chance to visit Finland and Singapore. And they were both touted as having high educational systems. And we noticed in both of their systems, they didn't have 50 different sets of standards. They had one set of standards that they were expecting all of their students to meet. So the Common Core was an attempt on the part of the United States to say, if you want to join this movement, we're going to set a high set of standards in ELA and in math. We'd like to have your state opt in to join. So one of the most common criticisms of Common Core is that it's a national curriculum and that it's a socialization of education. Well, every state gets to decide if they're in or if they're out. So far, 4 states have decided they're out. Texas, Virginia, Alaska, and Nebraska have not adopted the Common Core. The other 46 states have adopted the Common Core state standards, Missouri, of course, being one. So what we're trying to do is really, the bottom line is have students be more college and career ready. Essentially what happens is we have 100% of our students, of course, entering high school. But then what you see happening is as you work your way into higher ed, fewer graduate from high school, fewer enroll in college, few persist beyond that freshman year of college, and then very few end up earning a degree in 6 years or less. And so what we're finding is that more and more of our students are not getting to where we want them to go over time. Also, this, and I think as business leaders you can appreciate this, this is sort of a chart that describes the kind of skills that students are learning. The skills that are becoming less and less important tend to be the routine manual and non-routine manual skills. Those that can be replicated by a robot or some sort of piece of machinery. The skills we're looking for are more analytical skills, interactive analytical skills that students need to have. Unfortunately, the tests that we're giving today in our schools, for a great extent, are multiple choice and are not the kind that require students to think beyond the basic cognitive level. And I think that's what you're finding in Missouri, and we're finding that across the country. I don't know how many of you saw the 60 Minutes presentation on Sunday. It was sort of an interesting presentation. Did anybody see that on the robot where they were, I think it was Amazon that they were looking at. They were looking at a couple of other companies. And they had this huge warehouse that was full of products. And the worker that was sort of filling the orders was standing in one spot, and the robots were bringing the racks of products by this person, and she would pull an item off the rack and stick it in the order, and then the robot would take it back to its original destination. Essentially, the products were coming to the staffer instead of the other way around. And it was just a vivid example of how technology is taking over the manual labor parts of the job that used to be a big requirement and used to be a big employer need. Why do we have the Common Core? One is we need more consistency across all 50 states. Right now we don't have that. There's an equity issue with all students not having access to the same standards, opportunities for students to know skills and abilities. I think this is one of the big ones right here. And a big difference between us and Singapore, for example, is we tend to teach everything every year. So we try to teach a lot of skills every year through our curriculum. Singapore's motto was teach less, learn more. Teach fewer skills earlier on in their educational program. And they're going to learn those basic skills earlier, and then those basic skills are going to lead to their ability to be more successful long term. We also think there's an economy of scale. If more and more states are adopting the same standards, they can share resources, they can use similar tests, and those kinds of things can save states money in the long run. This is a little bit of a chart I mentioned to you earlier, the 4 states in yellow that have not adopted the Common Core. Everybody else has. So what we're finding, though, as Ray said, is that, and I'm from South Dakota, it's a red state. We're pretty conservative. And there are a number of people in our state that are starting to think that this is a national agenda. It's from the Obama administration, and if there are folks in our state that are anti-Obama, then that means they're anti-Common Core. I think it's important to separate those issues out and recognize that every state got to decide if they wanted to be in or out of the Common Core state standards movement. Missouri decided in June of 2010 to get in. South Dakota did as well. As you can see, every other state did. Minnesota is red because they've only adopted English language arts. They did not adopt math. I'm not really sure why, but that's why they are a different color than everybody else. Here are, if you need to understand a little bit about the Common Core, here's kind of some big shifts from where we are now to where we're going. In the area of English language arts, and I think you folks can appreciate this, over time what's happened in our ELA curriculum is we've gone more and more to fiction. Students are reading a lot more stories and literature, and teachers tend to gravitate to that naturally. And what we're finding is that students don't have that informational text and base knowledge that they need. So what the ELA curriculum is going to do is move away from nonfiction, or move away from fiction, and move back into more of a balance between fiction and nonfiction, which means that students are going to be reading what we call informational text more often than reading stories. We've gotten to the point in our curriculum where we're asking students, how does this make you feel? What are your general thoughts about this story? What we're finding is when they get into the world of work, they need to be able to back up their information with evidence. You know, why do you feel that way? Where did you find it in the research? Where did you find it in the writing? So we're moving more to nonfiction, which I think would be, from a manufacturing standpoint, an employer standpoint, I would think that'd be a move in the right direction. evidence from text. Instead of just asking students what the answer is, we're asking them, where did you find it? How did you arrive at that answer? Demonstrate your thinking. So they have to back that up with more evidence. And then the last one is we're finding academic vocabulary is very, very important. And words like synthesize and correspond, words that could have multiple meanings in different contexts, we're discovering that our students do not have a very strong, what we would call academic vocabulary. So those are the three kind of big areas that ELA would be moving from where we are now to more of a shift in these areas. If you think about math, as I talked earlier, right now in the United States curriculum, when we were in Singapore, we discovered that they focused on 2 to 4 concepts per year and tried to make sure that they built off those. We looked at our curriculum, we covered about 20 concepts a year in the United States. So the best definition we came up with was an inch deep and a mile wide. You know, that was really what described our curriculum. We tried to teach a lot of concepts every year. And as a result of it, we didn't do as good of a job as we could have with the key concepts that needed to be taught. So we're trying to narrow the curriculum down, teach more basics at the earlier grades, and then build on those basics in the long run. You know, I don't know very much about Jefferson City. This is the first time I've ever been here. But my guess is if you told me, if you were very familiar with the city and you knew there were probably 2 or 3 streets that could get me anywhere I need to go in Jefferson City. If I know where those 2 or 3 main roads are, I'll probably be able to get anywhere. The same thing is true in our math curriculum. If you have some basic foundations down, you can get a lot of other things done. I think we were way too focused on trying to teach kids too much too soon instead of focusing on the basics. The second is coherence. What that means is let's have math go beyond math and get into some other content areas to look for the application in other areas. Too often students only do math in math class, they go to ELA, they go to social studies, and none of those really come together. As I think about people that work for you folks, they're working on concepts interrelated all the time. Our schools have to look more like that. And then the last one is we have to ramp up our rigor. Frankly, we're not asking students, we're not challenging students enough in the area of mathematics. So many of the concepts that under the current standards are covered in grade 5 might be covered in grade 3 in the new Common Core State Standard. So we are actually ramping up our rigor. And you're going to see, folks, as a result of that, 2 states, New York and Kentucky, have already started giving the new Common Core State tests. Their proficiency levels have been cut in half. They were in the 60s or 70s proficient, and now they're in the 30s. So you're going to have to get ready in Missouri, like the other 45 states are, to say our proficiency levels are going to drop. We're going to see fewer students that are claimed to be proficient. We think over time they're going to recover, but right now we've got to raise the bar and start having the rigor be at a higher level. The teams that I'm working with across the country focus on communicating the Common Core, training their teachers, buying materials that match the Common Core, and then finally assessing students in a different way. Now the assessment in Missouri is either going to be in the spring of 14 or the spring of 15. Every state gets to decide when they want to ramp up with their new assessments. You'll need to talk with your folks about when that plans to happen. It could happen as early as 14 or as late as spring of 15. There are 2 tests that are available for states to use. One is called the PARCC test, P-A-R-C-C. The other is called Smarter Balanced, and that's the acronym for that is SBAC, Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. And I can tell you, by the way, the federal government paid for those 2 consortiums to develop tests to the tune of $350 million out of the Race to the Top fund. So that's how those 2 consortiums are funded. Essentially, here are the states that have signed on to each one. Blue states are PARCC, yellow states are Smarter Balanced. So Missouri is a Smarter Balanced state. If you're interested in taking a practice exam, if you Google Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, SBAC, and then go to practice tests, you can pick a grade level and you can pick a content area. So you can go to grade 5. One of a lady over here mentioned she had a preteen. So you could pick the grade level of your child, ELA or math, and they'll give you a short little practice test of 7 to 10 questions. I'll guarantee you, it's not going to make you feel real smart. You know, when you get in there and start taking some of these, they are going to be more difficult exams, and I have a couple of sample questions for you to take a quick look at. It's time, though, for us to ramp up the rigor and start challenging our students more. The tests will be computer-based. They're going to go beyond multiple choice. and they're actually going to be based on your responses. So if you answer the first 3 questions correctly, the 4th question you get is going to be a higher level question than if you answered the first 3 wrong. So in other words, it helps kind of confine where your learning is. Instead of just everybody taking the same exam, I could be sitting next to you in the exam period. You and I could be taking different exams based on how we did on each of the questions. It sort of helps sort and select students based on their responses. Much more sophisticated practice than what we have up to this point. And it really does measure what college and career success should look like. So here's a couple of questions from in this case it's a part test. You're going to be under Smarter Balance, but they're going to be very similar. This is a grade 7 reading and writing exam. Based on the information in the text biography of Amelia Earhart, write an essay that summarizes and explains the challenges she faced throughout her life. Remember to use textual evidence to support your ideas. So keep in mind, the student has to be able to demonstrate where they picked up the information that they're sharing in their essay. And then readers are going to read these and look for, they're going to be trained on how to score the exam and how to score this particular prompt. And then that student's going to get a selective score based on that response. This one is too small for you to read, but essentially it says in the space below, identify the sentences from the paragraph above that are unnecessary and briefly explain why each one should be removed. So in other words, not only identify the ones that are unnecessary, but tell us why you arrived at that example. Here's a math grade 3 question. A farmer plants 3/4 of the field with soybeans. Drag the soybean. Keep in mind, these are computer-based assessments. Drag the soybean to the field as many times as needed to show the fraction of the field that is planted with soybeans. Then the follow-up question is, type a fraction different than 3/4 in the boxes that also represents the fractional part of the farmer's field that is planted with soybeans. So in other words, a corresponding fraction. And then it says down below, explain why the 2 fractions above are equal. So the student's not only going to enter the answer, but also explain why the 2 fractions are equal. One of the problems we used to have with multiple choice tests is occasionally students would get lucky. And they would choose the one from the 4 options that was right, but you had no idea whether they really knew or whether they just got lucky. So this one, there's no luck involved here. If you can't explain why the 2 fractions are equal, you're going to be in trouble. And then this one is from grade 4, a Smarter Balance question from grade 4 math. Jared is testing how much weight a bag can hold. He plans to put juice bottles into 3 bags. He wants each bag to have a total weight within the given range. 6 to 7, 10 to 11, 14 to 15. So it says drag the juice bottles into each bag so that the weight is within the given range. And keep in mind, the juice bottles are 3 5/8 pounds. So the student has to know enough about fractions to know how much to put in each bag in order for it to be correct. And it says leave the bag empty if the given range is not possible using juice bottles. So this gives you sort of an example of the level of questioning that the students are going to have compared to a multiple choice exam in the past. So here's what business leaders can do, and I'm trying to be respectful, Ray, of time, and I'm just grateful that you're willing to give me a little bit of an opportunity to talk to you about Common Core. First of all, know your state timeline, and that would be important for you to know. I mentioned to you that you're going to be doing field testing and testing in 13-14 and 14-15. So you're going to be within a 2-year window here in Missouri of assessing the new Smarter Balance test. Also, advocate for higher quality Common Core implementation. My hope would be that you would be an advocate for these new standards. By the way, every state gets to decide, as I mentioned earlier, but second of all, they're going to be a higher standard, and it's going to be important for our students to have it. Under No Child Left Behind, states look better if their results were higher. So you know what the natural reaction is to set state standards that are a little easier so that your tests are easier, so your results are better, and therefore you look better. I'm a former chief. That happened to me in South Dakota. It's happening all over the country. It's time for us to quit worrying about what we look like and start preparing students for the world outside of high school. Prepare the public for an anticipated drop in test scores. Keep in mind, when the new tests are administered, whether that's in the spring of 14 or the spring of 15, the results are going to go down. And as business leaders, it would be great if you could help step up to the plate and say, we know this is going to happen. It's part of the learning curve. It's going to be a new baseline for Missouri. And then from that point on, we're going to start building up. I would guess that many of you know what it's like to make a big change in your corporation or company. Sometimes the initial results aren't what you want, but you know that over time they're going to get better. That same thing's going to happen in our education system. Educate the public and dialogue on the Common Core via social media and op-eds. We think business leaders stepping up to the plate and defending this is helpful. And the last one is talk to your local superintendents about how you can help. Is there something you could do in your local community that would help support the Common Core movement in Missouri? There's also some good PTA guidelines out there. If you go to PTA websites and look for Common Core, there's some good parent materials out there. And there's also some good informational tools. Kentucky's actually been on the front end of a lot of this movement, and Pennsylvania has some good resources out there, so those are just examples of places you can go to find additional resources if you want those. Chris Minnick is the executive director of CCSSO, and he asked if I could come on his behalf. His son was actually having a little some minor surgery today, and he wanted to be around for that, which I thought was important. So I agreed to cover for him. So I'm happy to be here and would welcome any questions raised at a later time after the other panelists are completed. So,
very good.
Thank you.
Do we have any quick questions for him while he's here?
Yes, sir.
How does this apply to private schools?
Private schools, if they're part of the state, would likely adopt the state standards like everybody else, because some states, many states are saying if you want to be accredited, and we've adopted the Common Core state standards as a state, then we're expecting you to adopt those same standards. So for the most part, I think the private schools are going to follow suit, but I honestly can't speak for Missouri and how they plan to handle that. Yes?
Would that apply also to homeschoolers?
Well, they're going to, if they get materials from the public school, then they're going to get Common Core materials moving forward. And most of the public schools share some materials with homeschool families, right? And there's a big movement now also across the board, and I'm assuming the homeschool materials will be the same, that they're going to want them to be Common Core aligned. So most of the homeschool materials will probably be aligned to the Common Core as well over time. Yes?
With this administration's emphasis on the disparate impacts doctrine, how have states avoided this being viewed as discriminatory?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question, sir.
Just with renewed emphasis by this administration on the disparate impact doctrine, right, in employment or hiring, also in education, how is Common Core avoided the pitfalls of being viewed as discriminatory?
Well, that's actually one of the challenges that we're facing right now is that. You know, I mean, and every state's having to tackle that differently based on some of the concerns that are being expressed there. One of the concerns is how will it affect students with disabilities? How will it affect students of color if they have historically had low achievement levels? And yet there has been broad-based support at the national level from advocacy groups saying these standards are good for all kids, and that even though we might have students that struggle today with our curriculum, that doesn't mean we shouldn't raise the bar as much as possible and try to work all those students towards a higher standard. But there are going to be some of those issues out there, and every state's going to have to sort of take those on based on the local advocates for those groups.
Disparate impact, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, because I wasn't until we did some research, is really like discrimination that happens to an entire group of people. So disparate impact would be if you did something that would somehow disadvantage a particular group of people. That's what disparate impact is, and trying to figure out how you do this in a way that does not discriminate against groups of people is what they're trying to do. One of the things I think made this attractive to some employers is that you want to know what you're getting when someone says they've got a GED or if they say they've got a high school diploma. I think for universities they have the same type of challenge, you know, making sure that people have the basic skills that they need or the basic knowledge that they need when they come into the program, so you know what you're getting. And I think that was one of the things that I took away from this, is it's really kind of trying to raise the bar and make us a little more competitive, maybe with some foreign countries and how they handle schooling. Any other questions? Well, we've got Rick here.
Well, right now there are, most states, including Missouri, are training their educators right now in the Common Core state standards. So teachers that are teaching math and ELA are going through some level of training. Every state's a little different in how they're doing that. They're communicating some of this information out to parents and to people that are interested. Hopefully you've heard a little bit about it here in Missouri. And then, as I said, the assessments are going to, everything from Kentucky and New York starting this past spring of 13, to the latest states that we know of would be the spring of 15. So when you say when's it going to be implemented, that's essentially when it starts, is when those new assessments are given, and then moving forward from there every year after that.
And will there be computer-based?
Yeah, good question. The question was, will it be textbooks or computer-based? And essentially, there's still going to be textbooks to a great extent. But more and more textbooks are moving to what they call digital media. So a lot of the standard textbooks are going to become online resources for schools. But most schools do not have the technology to go fully to a digitized textbook. So there's still going to be a lot of states and districts purchasing hardcover textbooks for 7 to 8 years. And then relying on the digital resources to be current and changing regularly to keep up with the changes that are going on. Yes?
How will this be implemented for, I'm thinking children that are, or kids that are in the high school level that haven't been subject to this standard? It's almost a generational thing, isn't it? Or
Yeah.
how will they be judged with regards to college entrance? You talked about the learning curve going down, the test scores going down initially. How is that, I mean, what's the impact of that? And also, I guess secondary, is there a fear of outcry from the states that all of a sudden, you know, that standard's unreachable?
Yeah,
initially?
yeah, both are good questions. First of all, as far as the implementation goes, colleges right now don't look at our 11th grade exam. You folks have a Missouri exam that you give to students at the 11th grade level, and they don't look at that exam very often for any kind of college admission. And my guess is they won't look at this one right away either, because they're going to give states a chance to implement it and get it rolling for a while. But ultimately, I do think universities are going to start looking at this 11th grade exam and saying, if you do well here, then we'll admit you to our university. But I don't think that's going to happen. There's an implementation gap, and I think most universities are going to wait for these schools to implement for a period of time. The concern we have about the drop in results is a real concern. What will states do when that proficiency level drops way down? Will they bail and say the pressure's too much, we're getting too much negative feedback, which is why we want business leaders and others to step up and go, we know this is harder, we know the results are lower, hang in there, let's allow this time to be implemented. And what we're going to see, I think, over time is results are going to start climbing back up again. Students have to be exposed over time to higher standards. As far as a high school level, I think you really have to give it 4 or 5 years. You have to give that freshman group, maybe this coming fall's freshman group, 4 years of a new curriculum before you can really assess their performance effectively. I noticed your ACT results are, I think, of the states that give about the same percentage of ACT, which is about 3/4 of the kids in Missouri take the ACT, about 75% of your juniors. You rank like 7th out of 20 states in terms of the overall composite score. But if you look at ACT's benchmark, which is they set benchmarks in math, English language arts, science, and social studies, only 28% of the students in Missouri hit all 4 of those benchmarks. In other words, they scored high enough on an ACT test in those 4 areas to be college and career ready, according to ACT. By the way, the national average is 1% below that. So 27% of the kids across the country hit all 4 benchmarks in terms of college and career ready based on ACT's definition. So I don't want to read too much into that, but is it an indicator? Yes, I think it is. I think it's an indicator that our students really aren't ready for some of the rigor that they're heading into after high school. And one of the flaws we used to have is we started building our standards at kindergarten, and we went up to grade 12 and we stopped. And we stopped oftentimes short of what they really needed to start a career or to be college ready. This time the Common Core standards started at the college level and career ready and worked its way back. As a result, they're higher because we found out they need more skills to be plugged into the workforce, to be plugged into the university system.
You just mentioned ACT. Given that ACT and ETS control the testing market for college applicants, are these Common Core standards then going to be factored into those tests so that we're going to see, I'll say, poorer performance by students on the ACT and ETS tests?
I think we're going to see the opposite. I think what you're going to see over time is higher scores because the concepts that are covered in the Common Core are closely aligned to what's expected in the ACT test. And currently I think there's a gap there where ACT requires a higher level of achievement and our students aren't able to do that, which is why 28% of the students aren't hitting some of those benchmarks.
Let me ask a question.
I should say are hitting them and the rest of them are not.
Let me ask a question. How many employers do we have in the room? If you could raise your hands. Okay. How many of you have had difficulty finding qualified people to start so that you can even train them? Okay, and see, that's a common problem. We've had that difficulty. Almost every HR call that we have, almost every plant visit that we make, we've had difficulty finding people that have the basic skills to be able to build on. You know, because I think most companies have their unique training. You have things that you have to train to be able to, for a new employee to do the job, but you need some basic place to start to build on that. And I think one of the things that, I know they're hiring a bunch of people. Ford wasn't able to be here today, but they're hiring a bunch of people for the Ford plant. And you know, one of their people told me they actually have to plan on getting 5 times the number of applicants than they have job openings, because they have to find people that can read a tape measure, that will pass the drug test, and that will actually show up for work. Mm-hmm. By the time you get through all of that, and the background checks and everything, you end up with about 1 in 5 that you can even then start talking about whether they're qualified for the job, or whether that you can build on that training to train for them for the job. And that's part of the reason this dovetails right into what I was going to say, and I will kind of brief it for you, and then we'll go right to Kevin. That's part of the reason why that Center for Manufacturing Excellence exists, is to try to get people to understand that, you know, the training systems that we have now are not working, and we're not getting people interested in pursuing the right type of training that they need to be able to succeed in today's manufacturing environment. Because, you know, most manufacturing environments have highly automated processes somewhere in the line. And if you want that person to be able to run that highly automated equipment, chances are they're going to have to be able to do fractions. They're going to have to be able to read, locate information. And I think this from what I've heard of this sounds like it's more like what we need our people to be able to do, to be able to go and locate information and to read more factual stuff rather than fairy tales. And maybe that'll stimulate some interest in the sciences and some of those things.
Yes.
We talked about economy of scale and sharing materials and resources. Does that mean like every 7th grader is going to read the biography of Amelia Earhart?
No. The Common Core curriculum has suggested readings, and then every district, every classroom, every state gets to decide what do we want our students to read. So they give you some guidelines.
That list.
Right. And the other thing that we're doing that now under the Common Core that's better is, and it's interesting, if you get a chance to look at Lexile ratings, every book that is out there for consumption has a Lexile level, which means essentially your reading level. And if it's 7.9, that's 7th grade, 9th month. You'd be surprised how much of the reading that we were having our students do was below their grade level. You'd be surprised how many books that are popular books out there are quite low in the reading level. So what they're trying to do now is have suggested readings that are at that student's level, instead of allowing them to read lower level books. The classroom teacher still gets to decide, do I want to take advantage of these suggested readings or not? But they're all going to be, to a great extent, nonfiction, so that we know that if I'm teaching 7th graders, I know they're reading things at or above their grade level, instead of having them read 4th grade material. And they're doing well in the test, and we feel good about ourselves, when in fact they aren't reading the kind of material that they should be reading.
From some of the things you said, it reminds me of when I was in school, they had tracking. And from the testing, you said if they're not getting it, we go to a different question on the 4th one, or if they get to 11th grade and things aren't, you know, ready for college level work. So is that basically what they're going back to? Or?
Well, I don't think the students are going to be tracked. It's going to be their assessment results are going to be more accurate based on their performance on exams. Right now, it's hard for us to know how high students can go or how low they really are if they're all taking the same exact exam. But if you really begin to allow the results to dictate the nature of their questions, it allows you, it's almost like a doctor examining a patient. The more questions I answer for my doctor, the better they can identify where I really am or what my issues are. The same thing is going to be true with these tests. But the results aren't going to, I don't think they're going to be used to track students so much as they're going to be able to accurately say, here's where your child is on this fifth grade math or 5th grade language arts.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you for coming and being
Kevin,
Kevin, did you have a presentation? Come on forward.